On Sunday, following more blocks of the trust funding going into accounts, consequences of actions took place with a twist of humour and a large dose of irony and heavy hammers. Now, around the world, you've all heard about bonds. There's these bonds in this bunker and this vault, etc., etc. And some of them are valid and some of them are not. Some of them have deliberate spelling mistakes, so they couldn't be used. And some of them don't. But the trust knows which ones are which. So most of these bonds have now matured. In other words, they can't be used. But the bonds are debts owed of money against the bond to the trust. So the trust decided to call them in on all the banks. Now, these bonds are not redeemable or transferable. But all these banks that I'm going to mention were all in negative liquidity after the Hercules incident last week, ranging between 16 and 42% negative liquidity. So Kim and the team decided to bring all banks up to 0% liquidity to balance the books. Except the bonds that were used all belong to the Cabal. Oops. As you will find out. The United Kingdom Treasury, 7 trillion in Swiss francs that were housed with the Holy See. 10 trillion in euros out of the Vatican Bank. The European Union Central Bank, 7 trillion in Swiss francs, again from the Holy See, and 10 trillion in euros from the Vatican Bank. The South African Treasury, 7 trillion in Swiss francs from the Holy See, and 10 trillion in euros from the Vatican Bank. So the clowns have to ask each other to liquidate those bonds. Oh boy, I tell you. Venezuela, Brazil and Argentina, 1 trillion each of Holy See Swiss francs and 1 trillion each of euros from the Vatican Bank. Now, these banks can all show these bonds as assets, but they can't use them. They can use it as a balance sheet to show as an asset. Now, JPMorgan, let's carry on with a bit more first. The Department of US Treasury, 7 trillion Swiss francs from the Holy See and 10 trillion from the euros from the Vatican Bank and 80 billion in gold. PBOC bonds, 1 quadrillion RMB or 150 billion US dollars. The Bank of England notes 2 trillion GB British pounds. CIA separately 74 trillion US dollars. Russia, 7 trillion Swiss francs from the Holy See and 10 trillion euros from the Vatican Bank. China, PBOC, 7 trillion Swiss francs from the Holy See and 10 trillion from the Vatican Bank. Oh boy, where do we go next? That's that one, we've completed that one. I feel like Drake tonight with all notes. It's just on this part, I didn't have time to get it all down. So the Rothschilds, before I go into the next ones, the Rothschilds told the banks to call in the bonds and try and redeem them. So JPMorgan then went to the Bank of England to redeem them, only to be told we don't have that type of money. I think it was 800 billion they were asking to be redeemed of the debt bonds that was owed to the trust. So now the banks and clowns are fighting each other over redeeming these bonds, and the Jesuits are doomed. Where are we going next? Bank of America, 87 billion capital pledge and sovereign owner of 40 billion Swiss francs of Holy See bonds. And 47 billion euros of Vatican bonds. They're all expired, they're not saleable, they can't be leveraged, and they're not callable on. HSBC, 6 quadrillion, I think that is, yeah, in total. They got 482 billion in euros, 76 billion GBP, and 182 billion in US dollars. Now, due to countless acts of financial terrorism against America, Iraq, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, and China, the trust has revoked HSBC's right to hold, trade, or transact in euros, pounds, or USD dollars. Wells Fargo, liquidity in USD or equal 272 billion, 150 billion capital pledge, which expired from China Treasury notes, bonds, RMB denominated, and 1 quadrillion RMB, and 61 trillion USD dollars, and 61 trillion from the IMF. None of them can be leveraged. They're all expired bonds or matured. Capital contributions. Now, the World Bank can negotiate bonds with the debtor for redemption, but they are not for sale. Wells Fargo. CityBank has been declared insolvent due to fraudulent activities. The trust is now their interim USD correspondent bank until further notice. We'll have more on CityBank shortly. Bank of England bonds 700 billion GBP, Saudi Arabia 50 billion Rial, World Bank 50 billion, Kuwait 26 billion, IMF 50 billion, embezzlement by bonds of Wells Fargo, totaling 876 billion. And Wells Fargo were 42%, they were the worst in negative liquidity. Those bonds, which are payable by the Bank of England, the Saudi Arabia goons, the World Bank, and the IMF, puts them in a bit of a pickle as well. See how it works now? We move assets from rogue elements and give it to other rogue elements, who then fight with other rogue elements to get back the bonds that they owe. ICBC, 6 quadrillion in RMB. CITIC Bank, not Citibank, CITIC, 26 billion USD dollars and 178 trillion RMB. China expired debt 127 trillion. UK Bank of England 7.8 quadrillion owing to the trust. Vatican Bank Holy See 68 trillion plus another 487 trillion and 367 trillion in euros. IMF debt 196 trillion with an expired of 96 trillion. The World Bank 867 trillion with an expired 762 trillion. And the UN 460 quadrillion, and the expired amount of that is 76. The World Health Organization 86 trillion, expired 62 trillion, which means they can't use it. And World Trade Organization 48 trillion, of which 27 trillion of that is expired. JPMorgan, they were given stock loan bonds of ExxonMobil 50 billion, Chevron 50 billion, the Rockefeller Center 28 billion in bonds, so Rockefellers owed them that. IMF 100 billion, World Bank 100 billion, Netherlands 100 billion, Germany 100 billion, Bank of England 800 billion, and France 100 billion. That's the central banks. Like I said, JPMorgan called the Bank of England and demanded their 800 billion for the bonds, and the Bank of England told them, we don't have that type of money. So now the Bank of England are getting rather pissy because the Rothschilds told the JPMorgan to cash in your bonds with the Bank of England. So now they're all fighting each other. Where are we next? Let's see if there's any more on this before we pass on to the next hammer. So Citibank declared insolvent is the gist of that. JPMorgan will follow. The Bank of England is in serious trouble. The Holy See Bank and the Vatican banks will get shut down. HSBC, countless acts of financial terrorism have been banned, from the right to hold euros, British pounds and US dollars, just like the Fed. Fed were banned from holding US dollars. So we need to thank Kim and the team for all that. I told you there was a bit of hammers and a twist of humour and irony tipped into it. And if you think that's the end of it, think again. We're going to have a music break and then we're going to come back with more hammers.